recommend this trip. When I went, I would get within 15 miles of Summerfield and I would stop and ask directions and they'd say, Summerfield, Summerfield. Never heard of it. Summerfield is a bit like Brigadoon, I think. Now you youngsters probably have no idea what Brigadoon is. A town in Scotland that only appears once a year. And this map, which you can't see, shows a relationship. Basically, it's in the greater East St. Louis area and it's in the prairie country. When the Casads settled there, they had the idea, they had the information that the railroad was going to run through there, and this was going to be a really prosperous community because the railroad did in fact run, it bisects Summerfield, but it didn't become a stop for anything other than water. So it didn't develop into a rich state. This is another map, which is, it's so bright in here you can't see, but I'd love for you to come take a look at it later. This is the plat of Summerfield, and it is, you can see, as you can't see, it's bisected by the railroad. And the one thing that's really fascinating about this little town when you go there, it is almost exactly the same size as it was. There was an original plat, and then there was a Casad edition. And Casad Street is still there. And the other founder was a man named Kavanaugh, and Kavanaugh Street is one street over. And it's just this tiny little community that, except for the fact that most of the homes have been replaced, it looks almost exactly as it did when it was founded. And this is the, yeah, probably you probably can't even see it from where you are. The lots are labeled, and they're labeled with the Casad name on them. The Casad brothers that own property in Summerfield. This is an aerial view of Summerfield. You can see that it's, well, again, you probably can't see. It's just a little square, and then down to the right is the other addition. And this was a community where there was a mill, and Tom Casad also had a coal mine. And the mill culture that developed in the prairies in Illinois in particular, you constructed a mill, and this was to process grains, wheat in particular. And if you were the mill operator, everybody would come, the men would come to town and they would bring the grain. And the way the culture functioned is while the grain was being milled, the men sat around and got drunk. And that in the 19th century there was a lot more consumption of alcohol than there is these days. Prodigious amounts of alcohol are consumed. And this is a culture that, from all appearances, Tom Casad brought with him here. He constructed a mill in Mesilla and also one in Chamberino. So that part of the culture came right off of the Illinois prairie. There's another delicious map you can't see. I'll just go through this. Okay, this is the backyard of the Casad home in Summerfield. I went up and down all the streets, and I really couldn't find that this home was still there. Most of the homes have been replaced over time. And I just shot some pictures of the homes. This is one of the older homes that's still standing. This is not one of, and another. And these old homes are on Casad Street. So some of these could actually be contemporaries, although it looks like where the original home was, I'm pretty sure it's an empty lot right now. They went to Johnson County, Kansas. The reason they left Summerfield, this town that they had founded and they had a very prosperous operation, was it seemed like Tom Casad needed elbow room. If you look at the history of Summerfield, Illinois today, it's almost exclusively in the context of Mennonites. It was a community that was more or less overtaken by Mennonites. The Casads were at least nominally Methodist. It appears that Tom himself left his religion behind, but they moved to Johnson County, Kansas. This is where he got into the squabble and ended up shooting and killing a man. One of the items that you have on one of your web pages is Ellen Casad's partial diary. It's a great story of what life was like for a young girl growing up in that family. This was the individual that he killed, a man named Louis Jarboe. They were involved in a squabble over land. When they fled, Sally was very pregnant, and they didn't make it very far before they had to stop, as I mentioned before, in Illiopolis, Illinois, and gave birth to Humboldt. But they went to Panama, and Aspinwall was one of the cities in Panama where you went to cross. And one of the sort of dramatic photos that you have in almost all the children of Tom and Sally comment about the Casad home in Santa Ana, California. How many of you have seen this home? One of you. Okay. Everybody comments, you see there are these big palm trees in this yard, and this house is stucco, right? And I often wondered, well, which family members are standing on the porch? So I went there and did a lot of research, spent quite a bit of time with a historian of Santa Ana, California. And this is another story that has sort of become clouded because people did go back after the family had left and relocated in New Mexico. This is not what the house looked like when Tom and Sally lived there. Not at all. It was a brick house. Tom made the bricks himself. And when the house was sold, and it was sold in very much of a hurry, and they scooted out of California because of this problem that seemed to be going on with the neighbor. There were no palm trees, and it was not a stucco house. The purchaser of the house made extensive renovations, and the palm trees were planted much later. So when the Casads were living there, they didn't have palm trees in Santa Ana, and certainly not fully grown palm trees like this. And there are lots of other photos available in photo archives out there. So that's kind of to me, that's kind of an interesting thing, because this is one of the iconic photographs that's associated with the family, and it is indeed the home, but it's been considerably altered. When I was there, the home no longer exists. There was an attempt to give it to the city of Santa Ana, and at the time they thought that it would cost so much to repair it that they didn't. And what is on the site now is a school, a private school, and they have a very large red brick barn. And I would bet a quid that the bricks were salvaged from the house. The school was not open, and I didn't have a chance to talk to anybody there, but it's this really big building, and I thought, well, there were a lot of bricks in that house. And so it's important to the story, but I'm guessing that if it is in fact members of the family on the porch, it was on an occasion when they were visiting, and the name Casad is not associated with this house at all. I mean, you have to find the lot and find the story and look at the deed records and see exactly what happened to understand But it is all recorded in the deeds and the transfer and the sale and all that sort of thing. So, now, good thing I have this in a different form. One of the fascinating things that Tom Casad was a great letter writer, prolific letter writer. We don't have examples of those letters here at NMSU, but at Pittsburgh State in Kansas, they have some letters that he wrote to Orla Casad, who was his nephew. And I'm going to read one of those letters. I think it'll give you a really good idea of what he was thinking about when he arrived here in the Mesilla Valley. And I would say that since the book came out, there have been 2 additional Casad publications. One is called Thomas Casad Writes, Letters from Mesilla, 1875 to 1878. And the other is called Thomas Casad, Agricultural Editor of Mesilla. You can find these on the internet. If you go to the Southern New Mexico Historical Review, you can read these articles at no charge. And they are, I want to say 2012 and 2014 respectively. But anyway, you can find them online. And I want to share with you, this is Tom Casad's letter to Orla Casad. It's from Mesilla, New Mexico, June 20th, 1875. Orla, I have been waiting for some time to find leisure to write you a letter. I suppose you have no doubt heard that we left California and are now living in the southern portion of New Mexico. We have been here about 6 months, and so far as I have seen the country, I am very well pleased with it. The valley of the Rio Grande is a fine body of land, and the climate is a very pleasant one, neither hot in summer or cold in winter. I will send you some papers, the Mesilla News, in each copy of which you will find an article over my signature, description of the country to which I call your attention. These I wrote in answer to diverse inquiries about the country from California as well as from the States. I had copies mailed to all who had written me for information. I also send a copy of the Industrial Age, which was published in Chicago, in which you will find an article on the Mesilla Valley written by Judge Knapp, my nearest neighbor. Knapp was territorial judge of New Mexico and appointee of President Lincoln. He's been here since 1862. He accompanied the surveying party of the 32nd Parallel Railroad as a botanist and geologist. I have bought a 3rd interest in the Bracito Grant, of which he speaks in his article, settled by Garcia in 1805 and on which Fort Fillmore was located. There are 21,000 acres in the grant, and it is my intention to buy it all up in the course of a few months when I shall have means mature to do so. It runs down the river 9 miles and is a fine body of land. There is on it at present about 80 tenants of the native inhabitants. When we left Los Angeles, we all came but Anna, who had a good situation